Hello. This morning's devotion is titled Chance, Random Acts, or God's Plan. If you're a follower of Jesus, I have a question for you. Maybe you remember bringing some of your old ways, your terms, your thoughts, your values, your practices, and your beliefs into your new life with Christ. I distinctly remember when I was a new believer wrestling with this idea of chance versus God as it related to the events of my life that I couldn't explain. But by God's grace, for me, the idea of chance was cast out rather quickly, and as I better understood God. But that's not the same for everyone. The idea that there is something called a chance is so firmly rooted in our culture today that even relatively mature Christians speak as if chance is real. But is the idea of chance biblical or even mentioned in the Bible? Is there such a thing as chance? And if so, how does chance fit into God's sovereign plan? Well, let's start out by trying to answer the question, what is chance? As it's used today. And as it's used today, chance is often associated with the roll of the dice or the pulling of a slot machine, sometimes referred to as luck. So if we want to define chance, perhaps the best definition that we can find would be that chance is where there are one or more unguided, purposeless events that produce some sort of result. Now, our primary question for today is, do things happen by chance, or are they part of God's plan? And if they are by chance, then to speak of someone as being lucky or unlucky would be appropriate. But if things don't happen by chance, then the terminology of lucky or unlucky would be inappropriate to use. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we read in chapter 9, verse 11 and 12, I have seen something else under the sun. A race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, and wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. No man, when his hour has come, will be like a fish caught in a cruel net, or a bird that is taken in a snare. So men are trapped in evil times and fall unexpectedly. Much of Ecclesiastes shares, what is the perspective of a person who looks at life without God, with under the sun. From such a perspective, then, leaving God out of the picture, there seems to be room for good luck and bad luck as part of chance. But what if a runner who is favored to win a race, but because someone in front of him stumbles, he trips over him and falls, and thus he doesn't win the race? Do we say to him, how unlucky? Or suppose a warrior king, has a strong army, the strongest of armies. Some chance arrow shot into the air at random by some no-name enemy soldier just happens to pierce his armor at the most vulnerable area, resulting in the king's death and thus the loss of the battle. Well, that actually took place in 2 Chronicles chapter 18, verse 33. You can read about it. Did we say to that person, that king, King Ahab, how unlucky? Was it a matter of luck? If you read all of 2 Chronicles chapter 18, you will find that God had his hand all over that from the very beginning. The soldier who had shot the arrow wasn't totally aware of the trajectory, but God, in his sovereignty, knew all along that it would mean the death of wicked King Ahab. A similar case of chance occurs in the book of Ruth. You know the story. Ruth is a widow, and she's living and caring for her widowed mother-in-law. So she seeks a field to glean grain from, to provide for both of them. So she went out and began to glean the fields behind the harvesters. And as it turns out, she found herself working in a field of Boaz, who was really from the clan of Elimelech. In Ruth chapter 2, verse 3, you can read about that. Ruth tells Naomi then the name of the man that she worked for was Boaz. And Naomi responds by saying, "The Lord bless him. God has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." So Naomi didn't see this occurrence as chance, but for what it really was, the providence of God. As did others, and you can read about that in Ruth chapter 4, verse 14. But Proverbs 16:33 states a general principle for us. It says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but it is every decision from the Lord." Now this refers to the use of casting lots, but really that's similar to us tossing a coin today or rolling the dice to settle a certain judicial case. And the case involved in Joshua chapter 7 was Achan. That's a great example of a principle of finding the guilty party. So Proverbs 18:18 gives us another similar case. Casting lots settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. Again, the idea here is that God's providence plays the determining role in the results of casting lots, so that judicial conflicts can be resolved with no matter how great the contention is. So Proverbs 16:33 is pretty key. It would indicate that something as random as rolling the dice or tossing a coin is not outside of God's sovereign control and thus not out of his plan. And therefore, the results are not merely chance. So we've heard of God's sovereignty sometime in the past, I'm sure, and we've heard it in this devotion several times. But God's sovereignty has two aspects. God's active will. Now that would involve something that God causes to happen, such as leading King Ahab into battle in the first place. Or there's God's passive will. And that's involving him allowing rather than causing something to happen. In chapter 1 of the book of Job, it illustrates for us that God allowed Satan to do what he did in Job's life. And is also involved in the evil that God allowed for Joseph's brothers to do to Joseph in order to accomplish a greater good in his plan. So what does it say about chance? Well, because we certainly can't always determine God's active or passive will, which is involved in our lives, because we don't have the opportunity to pull back the curtain of heaven to know what God is doing. But we do know that all things that take place are under the umbrella of God's will, whether active or passive, and therefore nothing is a matter of mere chance. So it is in the events of life. No matter how small, like the sparrow spoken about in Matthew 10, verses 29 to 31, the sparrow that falls, or how big they are. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 35, you see an illustration of that. In all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. And he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" So from our perspective, things may seem to be random or by chance. But throughout all of Scripture, it is clear that God is in control of his creation and is somehow able to take the natural acts or the random acts of natural law, the free will of both good and evil men, and the wicked intents of the demons, and combine them all to accomplish his good and perfect will. And for the believers, his merciful and grace-filled plan. So, if you're still thinking that chance is real, or you are wrestling with this idea of chance like I once did, my challenge to you is the same. Don't be so quick to jump on the chance as an answer to the unexplained, puzzling events in life. Rather, think biblically about God's involvement. Remember, God is the one who has a plan. He is and one who has eternal decrees. His providence and his sovereignty, his transcendence and his immenseness, and much more is present. So we should embrace his plan, though we don't have all the answers to things that take place in life. Thanks for listening this morning. Hopefully the next devotion you listen to, whoever it may be from, will be a blessing. So enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you soon.